So let's do those and then get out of here. We appreciate the questions we've received, and some of these were from the YouTube chat that we saw earlier in the chat. Well, and there's also some in Twitter. Okay, so we're gonna try and get to as many as possible. Okay, so there was one from listener Eshket in the live YouTube chat, and I thought this one was pretty interesting. What are the chances of Josh Malone having a breakout season? Yeah, to me, breakout season is totally subjective in how you want to classify that. There are some fans, at least from the commenters I've seen on Cincy Jungle and Twitter and all of that, that think that Malone is a fringe roster guy. To me, I think he's pretty much the lock for the number 4, number 5 receiver. Now, what does a number 4 or number 5 receiver really do in the Bengals offense? I don't know. I think that where he's going to kind of make his hay in the NFL is as a deep threat guy, because he's a height, weight, speed guy, and in the red zone. And I look at, to me, if you remember back in 2003, for those of you who remember, he's kind of a Kelly Washington guy. And Kelly Washington was a guy who, you know, before Chris Henry arrived on the scene in 2005 for a couple of years, he was 30 catches, 40 catches, maybe 3-4 touchdowns a year. He was more famous for his little squirrel dance. If you remember his touchdown celebration, that was always fun. And if you don't remember it, go look up Kelly Washington's squirrel dance on YouTube. But to me, if Malone has kind of a career like that, at least for a couple of years for the Bengals, where it still allows Ross to make big plays, A.J. Green to be A.J. Green, Tyler Eifert to do some things in the red zone, that's where I think that would be my ideal fit for a guy like Josh Malone. I don't know about you, Scott, but that's – and I don't know if that's even classified as a breakout season to some, but he's not going to supplant John Ross. I don't think he's going to supplant Brandon LaFell. A.J. Green's going to be the guy. I don't know.
Yeah, if breakout means like someone like Stefan Diggs or Willie Snead a few years back, where this kind of, or Cooper Kupp, you know, this past year, they kind of came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden it's like, man, this guy's like on pace for 1,000 yards. I don't think that is him, because like you said, some of the names you mentioned, I think as of right now, you know, the Bengals hierarchy is going to be Green, LaFell, you know, Boyd is going to get his shots as, you know, the third-year receiver. John Ross is going to get every opportunity to prove that first-round status. So there's your top 4, I think, right there. Malone's upside, I think, this year is, you know, fighting for number 5. And let's say one of these guys does beat out Alex Erickson as the kicker. That opens, you know, maybe 15, 20 targets or receptions this year. So I'd say that number 5 spot is a open competition. I could see, you know, Josh Malone probably having an inside track for that. And then I think if he were to break out, the biggest opportunity for him would be not in 2018, but in 2019, because that's the year when I think LaFell is no longer on the team. I think this is the last year of his contract. So obviously AJ Green's still going to be here. At that point, you know, Boyd and Ross have had their opportunities. They've established who they are or who they're not going to be. And if neither of them steps up, LaFell's gone. You have a little window where someone can kind of step in there. I think that would be the chance where Malone could possibly, you know, come in and be that guy, maybe be the deep guy that Ross was supposed to be. I think the challenge with Malone is he's never, like at Tennessee and with the Bengals last year, was never a great catcher of the football. I think he had caught like 6 out of 17 targets or something last year. And granted, targets are not always like perfectly catchable passes, but that's still not a very good ratio. And I think that's something that has to get improved upon if you know, he is going to be considered a guy in the future that is looked at as more than just like a depth guy like Cody Core or James Wright were until the next 6th-round pick came in the next year and pushed him out.
Yeah, and AJ Green's here until in Cincinnati until 2019. So after 2019, his contract expires, and he obviously had that huge deal where he's making essentially $11-12 million a year. So his contract is up. So I mean, he may be again one of those developmental guys that, you know, all of a sudden, a couple of years down the road, like you said, LaFell's gone. maybe AJ Green is either gone or at the back end of his career, and he signs kind of a team-friendly deal. I mean, you have to understand AJ Green's in his eighth season coming in here. I mean, that's pretty crazy to think about. So, and by the time that his contract expires, he's going to be entering his 10th season. So, I mean, business decisions are to be made there. But I think Malone's going to just kind of be a role player this year. Maybe spot big play here and there. And, just given his 6'3" stature, he is a guy that you can use in the red zone. So we'll see there. But I don't know if I see like a breakout year, a year where he's going to supplant Brandon LaFell or anything like that. But, he's got big playability and he's got good size. I did see some other comments, just kind of a little asterisk on this last question here, Scott. Any thoughts on Auden Tate, the 7th round pick out of Florida State, another guy who's a red zone guy, big guy, I think he's 6'4", 6'5", 220, 230, almost tight endish type of size. You think he can do anything in terms of cracking the roster and making some plays, or is he kind of a developmental practice squad guy?
I'm guessing he's practice squad. I know he's a bigger body receiver, one of those guys that has the frame that you're looking for. I think they would probably still have to work on things like separation and, routes and some of that kind of stuff with him. He's a guy that they can probably get in the practice squad without too much difficulty, kind of given that how far he fell pretty much to the end of the draft. That I think teams probably are not going to use a spot on their 53-man roster to take him from the Bengals. So barring something like a Desmond Briscoe thing where, another team overpays to put him on their practice squad, I'd say he should have a good chance making the Bengals practice squad if they go that route.
Yeah, and he apparently looked good in the rookie minicamp this last weekend. So, okay,
yeah.
What I hope doesn't hurt him is the last name Tate, and I think he's wearing number 19 as well, which is just, oh, buddy, you gotta know better. We did get a question on Twitter. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because it is so early, but the dude who sent it to us, Carlos Andre, is an awesome guy, a big supporter of the program. Essentially asking the question, if everything goes well, previous injured guys play the whole season, meaning Ross and Eifert and others, I assume. He's asking about Super Bowl. Very early for me to even answer this question remotely. To me, even though preseason games mean nothing, you do see some things on film there that do bode well or not well for a team into the season. I don't want to go into this. I think this is maybe a question we readdress, a couple months down the road, maybe in August, that sort of thing. But to me, my thing is Super Bowl, way too high aspirations for this team right now. I mean, I want them to aim for that. I want that locker room to aim for that. But for me, I don't see that happening. But I am higher on them. And I wrote a post on this on Cincy Jungle, kind of asking the question, like, why is the national media and national pundits, why are they so low on the Bengals? It kind of seems like maybe it just wasn't a sexy draft class, and they just haven't had good seasons the past couple of years. I don't think we should be talking about Super Bowl yet, but I also think there are guys that have them picking number 2 overall next year. I don't see that happening. So I don't know. Your take on that, Scott? It's
like what Jim Morris said. Playoffs.
Yeah, playoffs.
Playoffs. That being said, I think number 2 is way too low. As far as Super Bowl, the one thing I'll throw out, and this view probably won't change until they prove me wrong, as long as Marvin Lewis is the head coach, who is 0-7, whatever, in playoff games, it's very hard to assume they're going to be anywhere near a playoff as long as he's there. The one exception, I think, was in 2015. The team was just so good with all the assistant coaches they had. Everything was clicking. Eifert was healthy. Hugh Jackson was running a very good offense. The defense, everything was kind of clicking off until Dalton got hurt.
Yeah,
they looked like a team that was, they were beating good teams. They were beating up on bad teams. They were 10-2, and Dalton went down. Yeah, Marvin Lewis could not do enough to slow that down. I mean, that train, that CSX intermodal train was going down the track, and no matter how hard Lewis was grabbing the back of it, grabbing the end of train signal and had his feet, bumping on the railroad ties, trying to stop that thing. He just could not get that train stopped. And granted, when that train's not moving, it's a lot easier. So, if we see from Terrell Austin, and we see, okay, this offensive coordinator now has a whole year to run, the offense, kind of get things lined up. You've replaced some of the holes at center, at left tackle. You kind of get some of these things fixed. I think you could possibly get to a point where they're just so good they can overcome the Marvin Lewis factor. I mean, early, so that's very optimistic.
I'm laughing because it's just such a great, the team is so good they can overcome their own head coach. It's just like such a funny thought if you actually break it down and think about it. But essentially
that's what they have to do, what they did in 2015, where Eifert stays healthy the whole year, you fix the line, and you get to a point where we are just so good that not even Marvin Lewis can slow us down.
Just get out of your own way. Don't even bother. Just let the guys do their thing.
Yeah, and where he's basically on the track and the train just goes. It's not something he's going to derail it. He's just going to get picked up by the cow catcher, and that's going to. Now, if no one knows anything about trains, and disregard everything I said. Just the main point was, if they can get to a point where they're good enough to overcome Lewis. Otherwise, Super Bowl, I think, is a bit.
Well, I think we understood the visual. We understood the visual. I think we got it. If anyone who's watched any kind of Looney Tunes or whatever knows the visual you're kind of talking about there. But too early for and I guess it's better that this team is underrated rather than overrated going into this season. So there's that. I think a major, again, we'll readdress this question maybe more in August, but a major factor has to be health, especially on offense, and it has to be the offensive line. I mean, it is what it is. They've got talent in other spots. They kind of reloaded some other spots. I think there are the problem with this 2018 team is there are major ifs. It's John Ross, it's Tyler Eifert, it's the offensive line, it's can some of the aging guys on the defensive line, Michael Johnson, Carlos Dunlap, Geno Atkins, continue their production, or can Michael John? Some people laugh at the Michael Johnson production thing, but can they keep that up? We're talking about guys now who are entering their 9th and 10th season, depending on which guy you're talking about. So can they keep up some of the production that they've been giving the defense? And can some of these young guys fill in for Vontaze Burfict? Will Vontaze Burfict even play the entire 12 games that he's slated to play because he battles injuries? So there's a lot of ifs. But I think if the ifs all fall in line and they do fall into an area of wow, that John Ross works out, Eifert stays healthy, Burfict plays 12 games and is awesome. Geno Atkins continues to be Geno Atkins, and so does Carlos Dunlap. Guys like Sam Hubbard and Carl Lawson and all of that help out the pass rush. A guy like Jesse Bates can turn the ball over in nickel packages. All of a sudden, you're looking at it's a good team. Joe Mixon takes a step in year 2. Geo does Geo things. It's a pretty good team. It's just there are a lot of puzzle pieces that need to come together in order for this team to even be talking about playoff, Super Bowl, anything like that. And if it does, awesome. Unfortunately, this team is just not always the team that gets the best draw of things, the best luck. So we'll see. We'll maintain positivity, though. I'm going to tie 2 questions in together, Scott, so we can get out of here. But I think they are somewhat interrelated. Dean Burke in the YouTube chat says, basically asked about Marvin and playing rookies. He does say excluding Price, but playing rookies, I think Price is a necessity there. So playing rookies, do you think he's going to be willing to do that? And then kind of a piggyback on that, and it's from Austin Tran, about Frank Pollock's development of the offensive line. Obviously, Billy Price plays into that. So if you can kind of maybe tie those in together and a nice, neat ribbon, nice, neat bow, that would be great. And I don't really know what I think about these two, so that's why I'm letting you lead off on this one.
Let's see. I would say as far as playing rookies, I mean, Marvin is still Marvin. I know even if they've hinted it, maybe they're going to play rookies more. It's one of those things that, yeah, he says a lot of things. I mean, last year they were saying some things before the season too. They were saying Cedric Ogbuehi, he could play offensive line. They were saying Bodine was a good center. They were saying we're going to every year you kind of hear, we're going to change things. We're going to change things. We're going to do things different. This offense is going to be more dynamic, or we're going to, run the ball more. And then they get 3 yards of carry. And, until he shows it, I think after 16 years or whatever it's been, I think it's very hard to believe Marvin Lewis is suddenly going to play rookies. So outside necessity, which I think right now is Frank or Billy Price, I think everybody else is more rotational at this point, where the first half of the year, you'll see them kind of rotate in and out occasionally. And then maybe the second half of the year you see, where maybe they start getting a third the snaps defensively, in addition to special teams play. If they do more than that, that'd be really cool. I'd be surprised. As far as the development of the offensive line, the biggest thing I want to see is I'm very curious who they start at right guard and right tackle, because obviously with Alexander there, you knew it was going to be Bodine at center forever. They were probably going to keep throwing Ogbuehi out there. With him gone, they obviously upgraded left tackle with Cordy Glenn, who they traded for. They still have Clint Bowling at left guard. You now have a new center, but then right guard, you kind of have a 3-headed race with Trey Hopkins, who started there most of last year, Westerman and Redmond, who rotated the last 2 games at right guard. I think Westerman started 2 games and then, or I think it rotated left guard, and then Redmond came in as a backup. So I think those 3 are probably competing for that one right guard spot. So it'll be very interesting to see how that shakes out, and to see if maybe one of those guys ends up being really great, and it's another Evan Mathis, Nate Livingstone thing where we're like, man, that guy's so good. Why did we leave him on the bench for so long? And then right tackle right now is a very interesting thing, because it's just, it's almost like which guy's the least worst, because you have Ogbuehi, who is, I think everyone who's done anything media-wise has beat up on him. So yeah, we know his story. He struggled in college, struggled at right tackle in 2016, struggled at left tackle in 2017. He'll probably get a chance if he isn't cut before the end of the year or before the season starts. I think he will get a chance. I'd be surprised if he gets it. But then you look at the competition, you're like, well, maybe he has a really good chance, because you have Jake Fisher, who unfortunately hasn't been much better, although he did have the heart dysrhythmia. So you kind of hope, maybe that was holding him back. And now that he's fully healthy, maybe he's rejuvenated. He has, the heart. I don't know. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't know how, a heart, an irregular heartbeat affects him, if that takes away strength or blood, whatever. But now if he's fully healthy, he's in the competition. But then you have to figure, well, would this come back? Could this be a setback? Could he have a complication from it? So he's kind of in the mix. He might be the leading guy, but there's a huge question with him medically. Yeah, Bobby Hart, who's in the mix, who looked when he was signed as just like an insurance guy until they get their right tackle in the draft. Then they use 11 picks and they don't take a left tackle. It's like, I guess this guy's in the mix now. And he was a guy that, was not very good with the Giants. They ended up cutting him. There were some rumors he kind of quit on the team and just struggled and was not, I think Pro Football Focus, for whatever it's worth, rated him 78th out of 83 right tackles last year. So has never shown any ability. And then you have Kent Perkins, who's kind of this odd man out, who I think might be a fan favorite just because he was an undrafted guy. He looked good in very limited snaps last year in preseason. So at this point, any one of those guys, it's not like we have Willie Anderson sitting there. It's kind of like, I don't know. So with Frank, I guess long story short, with Frank Pollock, I'm just very curious to see how that shakes out. Which of these 3 guys who all look like they could be qualified at right guard, which of them turns out to be the guy? And then at right tackle, from this mix of, question mark upon question mark of unproven, of guys who have struggled, can he manage to turn one of them into a solid, decent right tackle? Or maybe that right tackle's on another team right now, and we're going to grab him on cut down day.
Yeah. There are the post June 1st cuts, and then the Bengals have made the occasional move after final cuts. There are some surprising final cuts from teams, and Brandon Tate was a guy that they picked up in that regard. They've made some offseason trades in the past, whether it's for Cordy Glenn or Kelly Jennings or Reggie Nelson or what have you. I mean, they've made a number of trades before, so that's an option as well. I do want to say, you mentioned Bobby Hart. What's interesting, if you look at Bengals.com and the roster, they have him as a guard/tackle. So he was never a guard, at least to my knowledge, with the Giants. So pretty interesting that they have him as kind of a swing guy. I think if Frank Pollock can get something, even remotely looking at solid to above average starter out of Jake Fisher or Cedric Ogbuehi, I think getting it out of both is, at this point, it's not going to happen. If he can get one of them to be an above average or slightly above average starter at right tackle, I think that would be a major feather in his cap. It sounds like, based on all of the guys that are working on the offensive line, they really like what they see out of Frank Pollock. I think Billy Price is a shoo-in for center position unless he's not healthy, unless that injury just does not heal correctly. Then the Bengals have some major decisions to do there. But, I think he is making a major impact on that. And this goes back to what I was talking about with maybe a little bit of a lack of love from the national media, in that, it isn't all about the draft picks. It isn't all about the offseason acquisitions from a personnel standpoint. Yes, that's obviously all of it. Or it's a good portion of it, but you have to look at coaching changes. And I think maybe why they're not so keen on the Bengals is because Marvin Lewis is back. But under him, you mentioned Terrell Austin, defensive coordinator. He's a guy that's a hot name. He had head coaching consideration going into this offseason. The Bengals bring in different secondary coaches. They bring in a new offensive line coach in Frank Pollock. They've made changes, and sometimes the coaching changes make all the difference. And we'll see. I'm going to give you and we're going to get out of here in just a second here, Scott. I'm going to give you my prediction as to and again, we're in freaking mid-May, but I'm going to give you my starting 5 offensive linemen as we sit here today on Wednesday evening, May 16th, and you can download the show later. It might not be May 16th when you listen to this program. But I have, obviously, Cordy Glenn at left tackle, Clint Bowling, left guard, Billy Price, center. I have Christian Westerman at right guard, and I have Jake Fisher as the starting right tackle. I don't know if you differ from me, but that's kind of what I have. I have Cedric Ogbuehi being a swing backup at left tackle and right tackle, and I have Bobby Hart being a swing backup at guard and right tackle. And then, maybe either TJ Johnson or this the gentleman we talked about earlier from Oklahoma State is maybe the swing center guard backup type of guy. But I that's who I have as the starting 5.
I think that's generally the consensus. There's actually a post on Cincy Jungle that I think, I was going to say I think I wrote, but yeah, I know I wrote it. I think it came out today is what I was trying to think.
Sure?
Actually,
sure?
Pretty sure, although they always get edited. I guess my English isn't good enough or something. They usually get tweaked in different titles. Whatever. Anyway.
Me speak English? That's impossible?
Yeah.
For you Simpson fans out there, that was the Simpsons line. Anyway, go ahead.
So anyway, it goes over the offensive linemen, and it goes over every player. What are their odds of starting? Who are the starting guys going to be? And at the end of this, so if you're listening to this and you have not gone to the site, feel free to go to the site. I think you can find a link to that article on my Twitter, even though I think it just goes automatically because I don't actually tweet or whatever regularly. But anyway, at the bottom is a poll, and you can vote who is going to be the right tackle this year. And the consensus, 2/3 was Jake Fisher. Mm-hmm. He is by far the big winner. I will point out Perkins and Bobby Hart are both around 10, 12%. Other, and there's not really an other on the team right now. Other got over twice as many votes as Abuehi has.
Interesting.
So it kind of tells you what fans think of Abuehi.
Well, yeah. I mean, and there was another post on CincyJungle.com, or I can't remember if it was Cincy Jungle or another site, but it was talking about, the validity of trading Cedric Abuehi this offseason. And, I don't see it. You're not going to get much in return. And I mean, at least, even if he doesn't prove to be an improved player this offseason, at a minimum, you have a former first-round pick who's going to be, a backup, a guy that you can plug in for a couple of games if you need to, and that sort of thing. But right, it's so funny, from center to left tackle, it's like basically in cement at this point, especially now that the draft's done. It's that right side that's very strange. And the Bengals drafted an offensive lineman in the 7th round. I don't think he has the ability to crack the starting lineup, but that's me. I at least not in 2018. I think that is maybe something that could be a possibility down the road. And this kind of goes back into the question. I didn't really address this, but this kind of goes back into the question of Marvin Lewis playing, young guys and all of that. I think the Bengals have a pretty good idea as to what they're going to do on the offensive line, and it could change. Yeah, Rod Taylor is the gentleman I'm thinking of, the 7th round pick, offensive guard. The Bengals have a pretty good idea as to what they're going to do, especially with those 3 positions. It's just, are they going to let him duke it out? And I would prefer to see Westerman. I think Westerman has much more upside than others at the guard spot, but we'll see. And I'd like to see either Fisher or Abuehi turn their careers around and potentially become starting guys. But I think it's going to be one or the other, not both. That's just, I don't see them doing much of anything. And I think, if like I said, if Frank Pollock can do something and get something out of those guys, I think that's a big feather in his cap and will be a big key for the Bengals in 2018. Scott, any final thoughts?
Yes, one thing I just wanted to throw this out or offer this up while we're talking about Frank Pollock and offensive line, because I know a lot of folks are talking about how great the Cowboys line was. He was the Cowboys offensive line coach. So he is clearly, the godsend of offensive line coaches. He's going to come here, and the Bengals are going to go from horrible to great. One thing I just want to throw out as a word of, precaution or just something I was kind of thinking, actually I looked into it, and I'm like, well, before we get a little too excited, if you look at the Cowboys offensive line, Tyron Smith was already there. Pollock became their offensive line coach in 2015. Tyron Smith, the left tackle, was already an All-Pro by that point. He had been with the Cowboys 4 years, was a 2-time Pro Bowler, already a All-Pro. Travis Frederick was already there 2 years, already a Pro Bowler. Zach Martin had already been there, had already been named All-Pro. The only starter was really Lyle Collins, who was drafted, or I guess he joined them. He wasn't drafted. He was supposed to have been drafted. He was, first-round prospect that fell for
that whole thing was like, what?
So they kind of, and I don't know why no one drafted this kid. But that being said, the line, he pretty much had an awesome line when he stepped in there. It wasn't like he came in and he said, "Ooh, get that Frederick guy," or let's get he was basically, he walked into a situation that had a great line, with great people who were already there, who were already playing at a very high level. So I just, want to make sure we keep that in mind and just don't assume that because he stepped into a great situation that he's going to step into a situation in Cincy, which was anything but great last year, and then instantly turn it around. So
yeah, I think we have to exercise caution about all of that. But and again, unfortunately, a lot of this stuff that you're right, but I will say he was the offensive line coach from 15 to 17. He was the assistant offensive line coach from 13 to 14 with the Cowboys. So I mean, he does have some experience there, and I think whether it's assistant level or not, that's something to note. But I think we got to exercise caution, and I think a lot of people think that Pollock's going to be this miracle worker on the offensive line. He very well could be, and what we're hearing from Bengals offensive line players, it sounds like they are receptive to what he's doing, and he is doing things in a much different way than Paul Alexander. Which Paul Alexander had his strong points as a coach. I've mentioned it on this program that I have a contact who is a college football coach, and Paul Alexander, in terms of offensive line coaching, is one of the most highly regarded coaches at that rank across the country, and people travel across the country to go hear him speak at public things about coaching and all of that. But he was with the team for almost 3 decades, and who knows? Maybe things got a little stale, and change for the sake of change is good. And I think Pollock, for the most part, is bringing a nice change to the Bengals and their offensive line.